Boker Tov, good morning. Welcome to our Aliyah presentation today, looking at the third Aliyah of Parashah Bamidbar. Although, of course, we're going to be talking about the first and second Aliyah a little bit as well. But looking at our Parashah Bamidbar in the wilderness, we've just started this week a new Sefer of Torah, and so we have the opportunity to come together and talk about that. When we spoke about a great deal yesterday about the wilderness, about the Torah, and so on. And so let's dive into our Torah portion and look at a few more insights. I wanted to mention, just saw a thought here that or at least a wording that brought up a thought, and that was that when the census was taken, Bamidbar begins by looking at the fact that God had a census taken of the entire nation, which we talked about yesterday at the very end of the broadcast, was building us up into a spiritual army. We're going to revisit that in just a moment. But I wanted to mention, because in verse 3 it says from 20 years old and up, from 20 years old and up. So everybody that was 20 years old and up were counted in the census. And it reminded me of something that I'm very fond of bringing up, and that is that there is an element of grace that is inherent in Judaism, particularly, of course, Pharisaical or Rabbinic Judaism, that pretty much contradicts the age-old idea that Jews and Judaism, and particularly the Pharisees, were strict and like ogres, mean, and that type of thing. First of all, again, some of you know these things, but it's always good to repeat them. Josephus brings down, and it's also recorded in talked about in the historical work, that the Encyclopedia Judaica. I was just reading this in at a work that I have that is an encyclopedia of the ancient rabbis. It actually talks about the Sadducees, and it talks about this aspect that I'm about to mention. And that is that the Pharisees, who Judaism today is, of course, based upon, if you will, the Pharisees of antiquity. The Pharisees are the ones who had, of course, the oral Torah and so on. And we seem to have some confrontations between Yeshua and the Pharisees in the Gospels. But if you review them carefully, you find that the conflict in those aspects are always the Messiah trying to get his brethren to be true to their faith. He never actually condemns their faith, their beliefs. He doesn't condemn their practices. What he condemns or challenges is the hypocrisy that he sees. You tithe your deal and your mint, which is not required. It's like going above and beyond the letter of the law. But so you're being really meticulous on that end, but you're not showing, love and mercy and justice and kindness. You're straining gnats over here, which means you're really being meticulous about making sure that you don't eat any insects, which of course is forbidden by biblical law. But over here, you're not being as meticulous when it comes to your musar, your ethics, and so on. Okay, you're wanting to do the ceremonial hand washing, and you're wanting to be extremely meticulous about that, and frankly, kind of stringent about it. But what you don't realize is that what's coming out of your mouth is actually defiling you, not eating bread, specifically bread, with unwashed hands. You never find in any of those instances Yeshua saying, stop ceremonial hand washing, stop straining gnats, Stop giving your tithes. Stop doing rabbinical things. You never hear the Messiah say that. Why? Because he's not upset with the practice. He's upset with the spirit behind the practice. And in fact, Yeshua himself is a Pharisee, was a Pharisee. Okay? He absolutely was. And in fact, the book of John in the first chapter tells us explicitly, John says to the Pharisees that the Messiah is going to come from, he is somebody who is among you. Okay, now, so all of that said, the Judaism that we have today is, if we went back in time, we would all be Pharisees. And there's lots of different reasons for that, but we won't get into it this moment. But what I wanted to say is that the popular belief in the Roman faith is that the Pharisees were mean and they were evil and they were wicked. They were the antithesis of true Judaism and blah 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 blah. And even in some of the Hebrew roots, well, it's not just some, but fundamentally in the Hebrew roots movement, it's really anti-rabbinics because because their mindset is still Christian, they have that belief. And of course, that also holds true in a lot of so-called messianic places as well. The reality is, and it's one of those things too, where it's so easy to find this out. All you have to do is just look at the writings of Josephus, the historian. Again, look at the Encyclopedia Judaica. It's not challenging to figure this out, but the reality is, historically speaking, everybody loved the Pharisees in the first century. The common man in Israel loved the Pharisees. They viewed the Pharisees in an extremely positive light. They were generally loving, helpful leaders. The Pharisees made up the vast majority of Jewish believers in the first century. And guess who they hated with a burning passion? They hated the Sadducees. Pardon me. What did the Sadducees represent most of all? Word of God only. Sola Scriptura. They did not believe in the oral Torah. They did not believe in all those extra, observances and so on. They were so-called Word of God only. But because they were Word of God only, Sola Scriptura, it made them arrogant. It made them legalistic. And the historians bring down, right, people who were actually there on the ground, that they hated the Sadducees with a passion. And so there is this idea that is false, that the Pharisees were legalistic, that Jewish law was harsh and really, really heavy-handed, and we needed Yeshua to come to kind of, for the love of God, get that burden off of our shoulders so that we could just be free. We could start doing whatever we wanted to do. We could eat whatever we wanted to eat. We could go to any pagan holiday we wanted to and turn it into God's holiday. We could wear whatever we wanted. We could be in whatever culture we wanted to be. We just, for goodness sakes, wanted to be free. And it's actually the exact opposite of that. It's the exact opposite of that. Well, one of the ideas that is often shared with people in their minds is that Torah law was harsh, that if you got in trouble under the law of Moses, that was it, man. All somebody had to do was say, you broke the law of Moses, and the townspeople would drag you out back, throw you off a cliff, drop stones on your head, and then go back and have a tuna sandwich, and rejoice that they had the opportunity to kill you, because it was just, that type of murderous heavy-handedness was just, Jews loved it. We thrive on it. And so that's the idea that you get sometimes when you're sitting in certain, buildings listening to theological discourses. You get this idea that under the law of Moses, it was like wild, wild west. And the answer is that's all phony, baloney, plastic banana. None of that is true. It's actually quite the opposite. And one of the ways that we know that is because of what the Torah says. All those who are 20 years of old or older are to be counted in the census. Okay, that seems rather innocuous, but what does it actually mean? Well, with respect to rabbinic law, it means that the age of accountability is 20. Now, it doesn't mean total accountability, right? You can't just say, "Well, I'm not 20 years old yet, and therefore I'm still a child." No, that's not what it means, because in Judaism, for a young man, when he turns 13, he becomes a bar mitzvah. Okay. And there's a bar mitzvah ceremony. He gets to carry the Torah. He gets to read from the Torah scroll. He gets to wear a talit gadol for the first time in his life. He gets to wrap tefillin for the first time in his life. He, for the first time in his life, can be counted among the minyan at age 13 and up. And typically comes forward in front of the congregation and reads from the Torah scroll. He gives a short drosh on what the Torah portion means to him, and his Torah portion, the Torah portion under which he's born. And typically he begins his speech by saying, "Today I become a man." And so from that point forward, we reckon him as a man as opposed to a child. Now, naturally, he's 13. So, everybody understands he's still an adolescent. Therefore, according to Jewish law, he is not fully accountable for, sins and so on, if you will, until he reaches the age of 20. So there's a 7-year grace period. In other words, if there was a Sanhedrin today, and let's say that, Ari was 14 and he committed some type of transgression that required being brought before a rabbinic court and being punished in some way, lashes, something like that, it wouldn't happen until he reached the age of 20. And even then, there's all types of due process and things like that. Now, for a girl, the age is 12 because girls tend to mature faster. So bat mitzvahs happen at age 12. So for her, there's an 8-year grace period. The point I'm trying to make here is that, contrary to popular belief, okay, and this is something you can share with your friends because they've been, Chinese water torture kind of theologically brainwashed to believe that the Torah law is harsh and such a evil and wicked environment. You can let them know actually the exact opposite is true. Even though you're brought to the age of accountability at age 13 or 12, you're not really liable to any real consequences, if you will, until you reach the age of 20. Nobody can prosecute you or even think about it until you reach the age of 20. And that's why the census happens here at the age of 20. Very important for everybody to know this. The grace of God is inherent in Judaism. 7 years of grace. Now, this also teaches us another valuable lesson, okay? Sometimes people will come into Torah and they want to go through conversion, which is awesome. But sometimes either one of two things happen. It's very common. This is what I'm about to say is true for Judaism at large, not just Lapid Judaism, but Rabbi Steinsaltz writes about this in his book, Rabbi Steinsaltz of blessed memory. People come in, they're very zealous, they're very excited, and they frankly take on too much too fast. And or when they come into Orthodox Judaism, such as they are, because of their zeal, because of their passion, they gravitate towards the so-called ultra-Orthodox Judaism. Okay? The Breslev, the Haredi, the knock-knocks, and they try to, they want to grow the 10-inch peyote, and they want to wear the all black suits, and for some reason, and again, Steinsaltz talks about this, Rabbi Steinsaltz, that they gravitate towards this very, very stringent, high level of Judaism. That, ladies and gentlemen, amongst Orthodox Jews today, a few percentage points. What's the actual number? I'm not exactly sure, but 2%, 3%, 5% maybe, of Orthodox Jews, people who grew up this way generationally, are in those groups, right? That high level. And so sometimes people who just learned what the word Torah means last week want to come in this week and be super Jews. And that's unrealistic, and it's not healthy. Okay? So Rabbi Steinsaltz, and again in his book, talks about the fact that it's critical that somebody who's coming in as either a Baal Tshuva or a convert needs to take it methodically and slowly. Okay? And don't become too stringent. Ladies and gentlemen, don't try to come in here and do all the halakha from page 1 to page 5,000. First of all, nobody does that anyway. Okay. Secondly, it's going to just set you up for failure. It's like, burnout, right? Taking off of the runway at Mach 5. You're going to end up crashing. You're not going to soar. Okay. And so people do that. All right. And you have to be careful. The other thing that happens is people who are already in the congregation, who have been doing this for a year or 2 or 10, people come in and they want to see that person, get their so-called act together, tomorrow. And that's an unrealistic expectation to put on people. Now, I want you to think about this in context of what I just got through saying. I'm sorry. I guess this is just a week for people who are unstable. So let me hide this person. Thank you. So what I just said was somebody who's Jewish, right? Right? They have Jewish family. They don't come into the age of accountability until age 13. And then for another 7 years, they're not fully accountable. Now, I want you to think about that, because what that means is, you have a bar mitzvah boy, for instance, who reads from the Torah scroll at age 13. That person has had 13 years to prepare to read from the Torah scroll, which, by the way, is no easy task. And a lot of bar mitzvahs really, really study hard. They spend several years studying to prepare for that. They don't just walk up there on the 13th birthday. They usually, beginning at age 10, start to go through bar and bat mitzvah classes. Okay, not just to read from the scroll, but also to learn more their coming responsibilities. And then from that point forward, they have another 7 years of growth before they're fully accountable. So, ladies, and gentlemen, what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is pump the brakes. Pump the brakes a little bit. Okay. Now, I'm not saying go at a snail's pace, but what I'm trying to say is be realistic. Be realistic for yourself and be realistic for others. Because if you had been born into a Jewish family, you would have had 13 years, frankly, 20 years of growth. You understand what I'm saying? And a lot of people want to come in and condense that 20 years into 6 months or 3 months, and it's just not healthy. At the same time, you don't want to be going on a year and you're just now starting to purchase a sitter. You know what I'm saying? You want to use things in balance. and so on. Another insight here says all those who are 20 years of old or older are called to serve God. They will have the mission of being not only his messengers, but also his soldiers. We left off yesterday talking about this spiritual army. The book of Numbers continually depicts the Jews as fighting for the defense of ideals. Sometimes they are vanquished, sometimes they are victorious, but we see them always as valiant soldiers fighting for their faith. Here we see a portrayal of the souls of the Jewish people being forged through the long experience of a life following after God in the wilderness. We talked about yesterday how there's nothing new in the New Testament. Once again, we see that the spiritual army of God goes all the way back, of course, to the law of Moses. Naturally, the law of Moses is the foundation of everything. We are God's spiritual army, and our mission is to live a Torah life and fight the good fight of faith. And our military expedition is to spread the gospel, not a gospel, but the gospel of the Messiah, right? Which is a gospel that is a Torah true gospel. It says here, as it says in many places, that the Jew, this is coming from the Kehil Tumash now, that the Jewish goal, our overarching mission. I talked about yesterday that every one of us has a specific mission, and we all knew what that mission was. God gave us the mission, gave us the option to choose it, and so on, before we came to this planet. But the overarching mission of all Jews is to transform the world into a home for God. It says that here in the Kehil Tumash. It says that in many different places, to transform the world into a home for God. What does that mean? It means to make God's world into a sanctuary. And when we see the dark forces trying to do the exact opposite, right? Trying to make the world unholy, and they're being very successful at that. What we have to do is redouble our efforts and to try to make God's home into a place that's appropriate for him. The Kehil Tumash talks about, by the way, the paradox. Because on the one hand, we are considered a community. On the other hand, we're counted individually. So again, everything in Torah requires balance. So it says, in other words, it talks about the census expresses the paradoxical interplay between individual and collective identity. Okay. Each one of us is a unique individual, totally different from the next person, and blessed with his or her own strengths and challenges. Each one of us is therefore of infinite, irreplaceable value. Okay. And it goes on to say, on the other hand, inasmuch as we all share a common collective identity, we reflect and complement each other. In other words, none of us is capable of fighting the battle alone, and we must all draw on the strengths and inspiration of our fellow Jews. Talking about a spiritual army, you can use the old, medieval armies as examples. You have some men who are archers, some who are spearmen, axemen. Some people man the catapults. Some people are swordsmen. Others are cavalry. Each one of those weapons and tasks have strengths and weaknesses, and they're for different purposes. And if you have just one type on the battlefield, you are an extreme disadvantage. And one of the interpersonal conflicts that happens very often is that people want other people to be just like them. And that's not good. It's not healthy. We need everybody to, do their part. The other thing that happens is people want to, there's an expression we use, right? People don't want to stay in their lane. They want to kind of take control of everything. Some people have control issues. And so if that's you, If you're the kind of person that you walk into a room and you want to just start doing Susie and Bobby and Charlie's job, then you need to just pump your brakes and stay in your lane and resist that and understand that's a bad midah, and you just need to stay in your lane and do what you're supposed to do, because yes, we're a collective community and we have our individual talents, and we need to respect those talents and understand that we need each other. It's very much about teamwork. It says, for this reason, it is not enough for us to only hear and read the Torah census for our own tribe. We must hear and read the census for all the tribes individually, even though they outwardly sound the same to us. In this way, we absorb their inner strengths and are enabled to identify with them. It's very common for people to be jealous of somebody else's talents or what have you. And the reality is that ought not be so. We're not supposed to be jealous of other people's giftings and talents, because first of all, they have nothing to do with it, right? You talk about some people who are gifted musicians or gifted vocalists as an example. It's always a good example. Those people are born with those gifts. Now, naturally, they will enhance them through practice and so on and so forth. But if you can't sing, if you don't have the gift of singing, there's not a whole lot you can do to get it. You could go to a professional vocalist and, you might improve what you've got, but pretty much you're not going to be there. Same thing with musical instruments, same thing with, I guess, public speaking, same thing with hospitality, decorating. There's people that are master craftsmen. And sometimes you just have to know your limits, right? For me personally, I'm not your construction guy. I'm very limited. And I've just figured this out in my life. I'm very limited on what I can do construction wise, mechanical construction. It's just not my thing. I can do some things, but it's very limited. And so therefore, I don't stress it. It doesn't bother me. I don't, a lot of men are very stereotypical. Seemingly they love tools and power tools and all this kind of stuff. I don't. I have a few that I can, in a pinch, I can put them into practice. But generally speaking, I don't want them. I don't want to use them. I want to hire people who know how to use them to do what I need to do for that, right? Do it yourself doesn't for some people, do it yourself stuff like that is like, man, they just love it. They want to lay their own tile floors, whatever. And for me, I wake up in cold sweats. I'd rather hire somebody, right? It's just not my thing. It's just not what I do. And I've come to embrace that. Whereas sometimes, we have things like that and it makes you feel bad. Like, I should be doing this, is what men are supposed to do, blah, blah. And, resist those thoughts. That's not true. If everybody could do it, then there wouldn't be people who do it. Right. So, you have to just kind of embrace that world. Same thing. And I think the Yetzer Hara, by the way, if I could just say, I think the Yetzer Hara just works on us psychological, so to speak, that when we see somebody operating in their gift and it's not our gift, the Yetzer Hara wants to make us ignore our gift and desire theirs. And so resist that too. When you see somebody who can do something really good and you're like, man, they do that really well. Don't sit there and just try to mimic them or want them or worst of all, hate them because they can do it and you can't. Just appreciate their talent and say, that's awesome. I wish I could do that, but I can't. And, whatever, it's fantastic. And then embrace what you can do as member of God's spiritual army and go with that and be excited, because that person who's a swordsman is not an archer. You're an archer. They're a swordsman. And sometimes you need somebody to wield the sword. And sometimes you need somebody to shoot an arrow. And so you can shoot the arrow. They can wield the sword. Don't try to be a swordsman because you'll get killed in battle. And if they try to be an archer, they're going to miss the target and then create a problem. So just, embrace where you are. Now, it says one more thing before our time is running out here. Take a census. Counting something is a way of showing that we value it. Isn't that interesting? When we count something, it's an expression of value. Okay. By counting how much of something we possess, we express how much each unit of the aggregate whole adds to the value of the whole and how indispensable each unit is to the whole. In this census, the fact that each Jew counted for one, neither more nor less, indicates that every Jew is equally dear to God. Okay. Every Jew possesses the invaluable worth by virtue of his or her unique. Notice it says his or her. I'm reading here from the Kehilot Humash, incidentally. Notice it says his or her. Okay, there is a misnomer that Judaism is very masculine, or there's a word I'm searching for here. But in any case, it's not. It very much honors the roles of men and women. And it says, by virtue of this essence, which the simplest Jew possesses no less than did Moses, all Jews are equal. All Jews are equally God's children. When we recognize this, we too will cherish and never diminish or overlook any Jew. And that's important, ladies and gentlemen. We should recognize that everybody has intrinsic value. Everybody has intrinsic value. The roles that we play are extraordinarily valuable. And you shouldn't see yourself, God forbid, as somebody who has no value and you don't really add anything to the community, and et cetera, et cetera. You, in fact, do add a lot. My dad used to say, when he lived locally, and he and Trinity, my stepmom, used to come to the services. Way back in those early years, we were just getting started. My dad pointed out that, he felt like he needed to come to the service. Right? They lived across town, but he was just making a comment that on those rare occasions where they kind of felt like maybe they were too tired or whatever, and he's like, no, we need to be there, because at least by us just being there physically, we build synergy, right? The more people in the room, the more everybody kind of gets excited. And isn't that true? I mean, it's true. And so I thought that was very interesting. So many years ago, more than a decade ago, my dad had this idea that, listen, if I don't do anything at all, which of course, he had is more than just being there. I mean, they added value, but he said, if all it was that I was just in the room and participating in person and being there to help build synergy, to build excitement, to inspire other people, it's worth me being there. And it's true. It's so true, right? And don't ever sell, the expression is sell yourself short. Don't ever sell yourself short. You have extreme value, very much so, right? Speaking of a military, right? Just one quick thing about that. Talking about an army, and I was explaining this to our daughter the other day that, in a military world, there's certain things that get a lot of glitz and glamour, and rightfully so. Everybody likes the fighter planes, and some people like the bombers. Very often, people are fascinated and intrigued with the tanks and maybe the artillery pieces and those types of really cool weapons and machines, the Humvees and all this kind of stuff. light armored vehicles. And so from a man's point of view, that kind of stuff is just awesome. We love, most men, not all, again, not everybody likes power tools, right? Not all men like to go to museums, right? But it's a lot of men do. Okay. So I do. I love it. But the reality is that the deadliest unit, if you will, on the battlefield is the single infantryman. The single infantryman is far more deadly than the big tank or even the, fighter plane. You say, well, how can that be? Like, well, those are all support weapons. And as we're seeing in Ukraine, right? Ukraine is a prime example. The single fighter is very deadly. And frankly, a tank surrounded by infantry is probably going to be destroyed rather quickly. And so we have to understand that you may see yourself as just an infantryman and you've got a rifle and you're not like a big tank, you're not like an F-35, Raptor, you don't really seem all that cool. But in the reality, your position is extraordinarily deadly to the enemy. So we'll leave it there. And when we come back tomorrow, we'll talk about the esoteric meaning of taking a census and how it means to raise the head, and talk about spiritual elevation. There's some insights I'd like to share about that. Until then, have a blessed day. Tell all your friends about the Aliyah. Share it with all of your people. Send it out, private message to all your friends. That'll be fantastic. Invite them to join us, because I feel like it's a good experience to learn together, right? So God bless all of you. Shalom Aleichem. Have a great and wonderful day. With God's help, we will see everybody in the morning.